Hey everybody, I know you guys have been listening to us chit chat. I am Zoe Huval, the president of the Anthropology Society at the University of Louisiana at Lafayette. Just reminding everybody to keep yourselves muted until we have our Q&A session at the end. And if you guys have a question during the presentation, just go ahead and throw it in the chat box and I will moderate those questions whenever we get to the Q&A. But other than that, I will turn it over to you, Una.
Okay, I have a slide, but let me share my screen. 1 second, I haven't turned my slides yet. Do you see my slides now?
Yes.
Okay, great. I first want to thank Zoe again for allowing me to come and join this wonderful event organized by the Anthropology Society at the University of Louisiana. I'm glad to be here with you all to talk about my academic journey that I have taken since an undergraduate student. For some of you, this semester might be the last semester, right? As you're graduating soon, you might be in a situation in which you're not quite sure about what to do, after your graduation. I hope my retelling of what I've done hopefully might be helpful for you to think through what you would like to do in the future, especially if you're thinking about, for example, moving on to a graduate school. For those who are freshmen or sophomores, I hope my presentation will kind of deepen your relationship with your studies and help you to rethink your life attitude, or so to think about or imagine a path that you might want to take after your time at the university. While I'm not the wisest person, I must tell, you can seek out your advice for or receive help from, but I hope this session for this 1 hour will help you to think that through. Yeah. So my question that I would like to put forward for this presentation is, when a field site becomes our home, what kinds of anthropological knowledge can we produce? In thinking about this question, I'll be talking about my academic path as well as my research journeys. I'm from Jeju Island in South Korea. So if you see this little spot here and this little blue arrow indicates, before I move on to the next slide, I would like to kind of show you a short video clip about Jeju Island to kind of get a sense of how the island is represented in this video. This is about 1.5 hour. 1.5 minute video, not an hour. You don't want to go that far. And after watching this video together, I would ask you to type any kinds of words or descriptions that you receive from this footage on the chat box. And 1 second. Sorry, I'm now out of my session again. I think I should put it in here. Do you see am I still sharing my screen? Do you see this footage? Yeah? Okay, thank you. So let me double check my sound is on. Share sound. Yeah, so could you now share your thoughts? Any images that
I would.
I was like,
yes,
Okay.
please.
Hi, my name is Lewis. It was very interesting. It
Hello.
was very amazing. It was from Korea, right? It was very beautiful. I can tell you that for sure. It's beautiful. It's remind me of my a show called Colonel Mine Beyond Border. They made a movie. They were filming it, and it was beautiful. The landmark was extraordinary.
Thank you. Do we also have any other thoughts?
I was like liking kind of how it was jumping between. Well, first of all, the music, sick, perfect, such a good groove. But I like that it was like flashing between these images of nature, but then also technology. So it's like it kind of goes hand in hand with our modern society. Because in places like this, we have like a certain idea of what it should look like, and then like we have this idea that it should look very natural and beautiful, but then it's also obviously modern. So just very interesting.
Along those lines, I really noticed like the artistic expression associated with the imagery, you know, along the lines with like the environment and the flora and, you know, the geology that exists. There's like this, you know, meshing between the two environments.
Yeah, thank you so much for your comments. Please feel free to participate on the chat box if you have any other thoughts or words. So yeah, as we all saw in the image, Jeju Island is represented beautifully, should I say that? Or, you know, a town that is modern, and also as Zoe mentioned, kind of artsy, kind of, you know, place. It is, though, Jeju Island is known as a tourist island in South Korea, just like Hawaii here in the US. Many newly wedded couples visit there for their honeymoons, and the island is one of the most popular places in Korea that people will go to if they're on short vacations or for their weekends. But this is not the total story of the island. While, you know, the video shows the touristic images or, you know, these beautiful images of the island in a piece of very loud electronic music that might welcome visitors and tourists. The island is embedded in a tragic history and memories of violence that are burdensome for the people to bear. And we are going to look at what that will be in coming slides. Now let me go to the next slide. Yeah. So before I talk about the history of the island, let me first introduce my education path. It is to show my anthropological background, which became crucial for me to rethink my home island. I grew up on the island until the high school years, and then I moved to Sydney, Australia, to begin my undergraduate studies. I went to Macquarie University, and that was where I met anthropology for the first time in my life. I guess some of you might have met anthropology first time at this university too. I am not sure about now, but at the time, the program on development studies and cultural change consisted of courses from anthropology and human geography. Some of you might feel related to this too, but taking anthropology classes for me it was so hard because the courses challenged me to think over the things that I took for granted while living in my world, right, which I was not quite used to. Nonetheless, I was keen to take more anthropology classes because not only the ethnographies that I was reading, but also the conversations that and the relationships that I cultivated with my professors were so much valuable. If this is anyone's interest, the reason why I majored in development studies was that I wanted to become an NGO worker in the field of international development. So I remember I spent my last year at the university about what I want to do after graduation. So that was my third year at school, because in Australia it's a 3-year course, not 4-year course for the undergraduate. Opportunities were limited for me to work in Australia because I'm not an Australian citizen. I was on a non-immigrant visa. And I moved back home because I knew that I wanted to work in the international development field, which sounded kind of big and cool, right, for me at the time. I started applying for a job, which in the end allowed me to work in Malawi, which is in Africa, for about 4 years. I don't know how familiar with you are with the location. It's a neighboring country of Zimbabwe, Mozambique. It's in the southern part. But I will not much talk about my experiences in Malawi in this presentation, because I would like to orient ourselves about what to think about the ways in which we produce our anthropological knowledge in relation to our home in quotation marks. But I'm happy to tell you more about it during our Q&A session if the time allows. So while working in this field in Malawi, I wanted to study more critically about the work that I was doing, because I was kind of charmed by anthropology in the sense that the studies allowed me to question my life perspective and explores my curiosity among many other things. I decided to major in anthropology, this time at SOAS in London, in the UK. And now I'm currently in the PhD program in the Department of Anthropology at Johns Hopkins University. I will introduce the researches that I have done and I am doing at these institutions in the next slides. So generally, I ask questions on violence, kinship, history, memory, and gender. These were not the key research ideas that I decided or determined to work at the beginning of the research. These are the themes that came about in my research and how my projects have developed into. While I will talk about my research in detail in the next slides, let me briefly tell you what my research projects I'm currently doing briefly. So at SOAS, I did my MA thesis on Kukurahandi. This is a state violence conducted by the Mugabe government in 1980s, which resulted in about 30,000 deaths in Matabele land, one of the provinces in Zimbabwe. I got to know about this violence through one of my friends in London. We shared a history of violence. In the case of my hometown, the island has a history of violence called Jeju Sasam. During the US military occupation and the administration of the first South Korean government, which was between late 1940s and early 1950s, about 30,000 islanders, was about 10% of the population at the time, were killed because they were suspected as communist sympathizers. Besides the research on Jeju Sasam, I am also involved in a collaborative project of COVID-19, in which Vina Das and Clara Han, who are faculty at my university, in my department, work as PIs. Moreover, I'm interested in looking at the diasporic experiences of Jeju Zionist Koreans in Osaka. So now let me talk about my MA research. For those who are unfamiliar with what happened in Zimbabwe, I also have a news video clip by Al Jazeera on defense. Let me now share that 1 second. So that was that.
This public hearing was meant to encourage people to talk about atrocities committed in Matabeleland during the 1980s. But some here feel the National Peace and Reconciliation Commission, set up by Zimbabwe's government, is a waste of time. President Emmerson Mnangagwa was in charge of internal security during the Gukurahundi massacres, where thousands of people were killed, allegedly by forces loyal to Robert Mugabe, the former president.
People from this area, mainly Matabeleland and Midlands, needs to see the very guys who really took part in those atrocities being arrested, being taken to court, because we are saying that most of them are still alive. They are still there even in the government. So we are like saying, if justice is to be done, those people should be arrested.
Soon after independence from Britain in 1980, Mugabe believed some Zimbabweans were plotting to overthrow him. He accused some communities of working with and hiding his enemies he called dissidents.
Some people say they don't want an apology, they don't even want compensation. As far as they are concerned, these hearings shouldn't go ahead. They don't trust the government.
Those who want the hearings to continue so they can get answers are frustrated. These three came from an area called Cholocho. They say soldiers came to their village in 1983 looking for dissidents.
It's difficult to talk about what happened. They killed my husband, then they beat and raped me. It's very painful.
The Gukurahundi massacres and other atrocities tore apart families. Some people still don't know where their loved ones are buried.
What is it that can unite this country? Unless we hear what is aching people, what is troubling people, what are the major problems that are keeping us divided, we do not know how far we can move.
Mugabe called the massacres a moment of madness, but he never apologized. Forgiveness and healing will be a long, slow and painful journey for those desperate for answers. Harumatasa, Al Jazeera, Lupane, Zimbabwe.
And now let me go to my slide. Do you see my slide now? Yeah, okay. So as I mentioned before, I first heard about this violence.
It's a country in chaos where the mob rules. In Zimbabwe, hundreds of white-owned properties have been seized by so-called war veterans. Farmers have been terrorized.
Sorry. Okay, now back to my slide again. So, yeah, I first heard about this violence. My friend is from Matabeleland, Zimbabwe, and it was his parents who went through the violence. I think I became curious about this because I have a similar history in my family, which I will mention shortly. It was a hard project, I must say. Not only I did not quite know much about the violence, but also the testimonies described in the report, for example, in this book, were very hard for me to mull over because they were very cruel and violent. I could not conduct a fieldwork in Zimbabwe on this subject because it was during the Mugabe government, and I would have been arrested, right, if I did conduct the research there on Gukurahundi. This is a violence kept in silence until even now. There have been a few voices that came out recently from Zimbabwean migrants and scholars in South Africa and elsewhere in the world. So in my research, Gukurahundi making and unmaking of silence of a post-war conflict of Zimbabwe, I suggested that the experience of the violence in the past are embedded in the present. Although the big history periodizes the violence and describes it as if the events only took place during the period between 1983 and 1987, this is not an ending story for the people. The experiences come to the surface as their physical ones, or sites in their residence, or their relations with their neighbors, and all other things all evoke such experiences in their everyday life. Similar to the history of my friend in London, the story of Jeju Sasam is embedded in my relations to my world. Let me now show you a video clip of news on Jeju Sasam, reported this time by Arirang News. Let me go back to that again, and I have this link here. Okay.
Now, along with the Moon Jae-in's administration's efforts to commemorate the discover the truth about the April 3rd Jeju incident that began 70 years ago today, our Cha Sang-mi delves deeper into what triggered the incident and why it is not considered an official part of Korea's modern history.
Jeju Island is famous for its beauty and natural wonders, but its dark history is often overlooked. In 1947, the shooting of civilians by police during the March 1st movement celebration triggered a period of turmoil on Jeju Island.
A child at the march was ran over by the police. As the crowd grew louder around the policeman who claimed he didn't know there was a kid, other officers started firing their guns at innocent people, killing 6. If the government back then and the U.S. military government had apologized, this might not have become such a big incident.
The April 3rd Jeju incident is a series of events that took place from 1947 to 1954, resulting in the highest number of casualties in modern Korean history, excluding the Korean War. Some 25,000 to 30,000 people were killed. It was a horrific massacre, but the truth behind the incident wasn't revealed until over half a century later.
The then government distorted the incident as a communist riot and banned the public from even discussing it. There was a time when authors would get arrested if they published novels or literary pieces featuring this theme.
Citizens' efforts to find the truth led to the Special Act on the Restoration of Honor of the Victims in 2000.
One of the public-level efforts includes a petition to obtain an official apology for the incident from the United States. We can't just blame the then U.S. government, but it's true they were behind the strategy and planning.
Reconciliation movements have also been seen on Jeju Island recently, the families of the deceased and the police association making reconciliatory statements and paying tribute together.
The general Korean public lacked understanding of the Jeju incident, often thinking it is just the history of Jeju. So the people of Jeju felt very isolated. But the incident is not just Jeju's history. It is our country's tragedy that we need to help heal and restore.
The head of the National Museum says this is a horrendous event in Korean history, but many parts of the world nowadays are also experiencing similar tragedies, and that through understanding and empathizing with the pain of Jeju incident, people can strive together to try and prevent similar tragedies in the future. Cha Sang-mi, Arirang News.
Let me now make sure I stop this video so that it doesn't go. Oh, sorry, I didn't do that. Okay, let me now go back to my slide. So I would like to recall the video clip that I showed you in the beginning of this presentation. While Jeju Island has such touristic images in there, this video clip that we just watched together present contrasting perceptions of the island. The dark images of this tragic history does not often come to the surface when talking about the island. So in my research, I examine how the history of Jeju Sasam is enclosed in the everyday life of the islanders, as I cannot conduct in-person field research, right, because of the circumstances of COVID-19. I try to familiarize myself with narratives from testimonies, videos, or other ethnographies that contain such voices. In addition, I also look at how the US military occupation took place on Jeju Island when the violence of Jeju Sasam was unfolding. With the US military archives that I can access to without visiting the archives because they're closed, I explore how Jeju appears in what images in the eyes of the US military. COVID-19 is another research that I'm doing currently. Jeju is no exception from the pandemic, as we all are. The first case of COVID-19 on Jeju Island occurred on February 20, 2020, 1 month after the first case appeared on the mainland on January 20. It was by a soldier who had vacationed in Daegu, another city in the mainland, from February 13th through 18th, I think. Jeju Island has had relatively fewer instances of COVID-19 than other parts of South Korea. As of February 28, for example, this year, the aggregate number of cases on Jeju Island was about 570 out of 89,676 total cases recorded in South Korea. The majority of confirmed cases occurred toward the end of 2020, when the third wave of COVID-19 hit its peak in South Korea. I conducted my research during the period between June and November 2020, and it was when the daily number hardly rose above 5, and the total number of cases during the time had only reached 60. The research is derived from a collaborative network of scholars across 5 countries, which are Chile, India, China, South Korea, and Brazil. The survey template was developed by Vinadas and Clarahan, my faculty members, and modified for each country for contextual relevance. This research on Jeju Island was supported by the Society for Psychological Anthropology, Robert Levinson Foundation Fellowship, made possible by a generous donation from the Robert Levinson Foundation. The larger research, not the research on Jeju, is supported by NSF. With the household survey template, I conducted bi-weekly, with this household survey template, I conducted bi-weekly first round interviews among 10 households between June and August 2020. And because in-person field research is restricted, my interviews were organized virtually with the help of my research assistants on the island. As the pandemic persisted, I performed additional interviews with 6 households who agreed to an extension of the survey. I'm presenting part of my research outcome at the Association of Asian Studies Conference, which will be held this month. I think it will be in late March. I'm not sure if any of you is planning to attend it, but if you are, you will be able to see it on demand. As I mentioned earlier, I'm also interested in this diasporic experiences of Jeju Zainichi Koreans in Osaka. Jeju Zainichi Koreans are Korean residents in Japan, as some people might call, who are originally from Jeju Island. Many of the islanders during the time of the violence fled to Japan, especially Osaka, which is a migrant town for Jeju Islanders. My research interest in the diasporic experiences of the Zionist Koreans comes from my interaction with them when they were building a monument in this picture on the left. This picture on the left for the victims of the Jeju Sasam. While it took about 70 years since the violence happened, they wanted to serve the souls who were killed during the time. I was part of the team that collected stones from each village, as you can see here on the island. There are about 180 villages on the island, and we went to each of the community to collect the stones. The stone represented connection to the home village, to the Jeju Zionist Koreans as witnesses of the past events. The image on the right shows a scene of a ritual conducted at the site where this monument is in the first commemoration ceremony in 2018. This research is in an early stage. The current circumstances of COVID-19 prevents me again from entering the country because Japan has closed its border to foreigners. I'm not sure when I can visit Osaka again, to be honest, but in the meantime, I'm reading around Jeju Zionist Koreans. So far, I have showed you my research around home, Jeju Island. Here, I want us to reflect upon a question that I brought up earlier in the beginning of the presentation. When a field site becomes home, what kinds of anthropological knowledge can we produce? The ways to go about this question, I'm sure, can vary. But for my case, it is about, I think, rethinking the history of the island, especially its relation to the US occupation and Japanese colonialism, and as well as its relation to the mainland Korea. It is also about, I think, bringing agency to the island's history, which is, marginalized or also considered as peripheral compared to the history of the mainland. In this sense, I think I participate in activism through my research. I consider my research is the extension of my work back in Jeju with other activities, with our other activists of Jeju Sasam. I think I should stop here. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I don't need help at all, but thank you so much. Yeah.
That was awesome. Thank you for that presentation. I definitely learned a lot. Does anybody have any questions about the presentation? And you can either unmute yourself or put it into the chat box, and we can address it. I do have a quick question for you. What type of, how do you find, well, okay, first, do you go into like archives or archival databases whenever you're doing your research?
Yeah, so for your, I think you're talking about the Jeju Sasam and the US occupation thing, right? Some archives have their electronic database. For example, NARA also has one which anyone can go into and look for the data there. Or in case of Korean history, we also have another archive, electronic archive, that contains resources not only from the US, but from Australia or elsewhere in the world. So there also I can kind of search Jeju or the name of the violence in there in the search engine box, and then I can download the archives and read it through.
Do you think you are getting like enough material from those that those services?
Of course, my the range of the materials that I can have an access to is quite limited. While, for example, in NARA, there are like boxes of archival files there, but on the internet, not every single file is scanned. However, still, I'm just trying to kind of get through, with the archives that I can have an access to. And then, but I think for anthropology, it's what I realized also working with my advisors is that it's about how to kind of delving into one archival material, reading against the grain, or how, for example, how the pronouns are detected there, or how an event is described there. There's so many things that I can do with one archive, one archival material. So it was something great to have developed this kind of eye on how to look at the archivals.
That's awesome. I love archives, but I always get swamped in them because I don't know exactly, I don't know yet how to distinguish between usable material and some other stuff. We do have a question from Renee. He was wondering if you've noticed any discrepancies between the experiences of Jeju residents and the U.S. military archives you're referencing.
Yeah, definitely. So, for example, the how to say Jeju Sasam, the violence, some part of it was about an uprising of the residents at the time to make voices against the U.S. military government that was occupying there. But then in the U.S. archive, in the U.S. archives, I would see that as being associated with communism or the activities of the Reds. And so on. So I think the perspectives of looking at this violence are so much different.
It's so fascinating, man. That's like one thing that I love about studying anthropology and wanting to continue. Even so, like I'm more interested in linguistic anthropology personally, but even then, you're looking at all the different perspectives, and looking at the similarities and differences and how they interact and act in social contexts. But that's so awesome. Awesome. Well, I don't think that we have any more questions in the chat unless anybody has any last minute questions. I think we are good to go. Thank you guys so much for attending, and thank you, for the presentation.
Thank you so much.
Everybody have a safe weekend and have fun.
You too.
Bye, guys.
Thank you.